Yeah, hello everyone, Irvin Rex here, and welcome back to another video. So I saw this video by Simple History called "Who Will Help North Korea If It's Attacked?" And considering the global and geopolitical situation of the world nowadays, I thought it best that I react to this on the channel and give my own commentary. Yeah, let's get to it, shall we?
Is North Korea truly isolated? Technically, the Korean War never ended. Both sides merely agreed to an armistice, a ceasefire, not a peace treaty, that is held since 1953.
Yup. And because of that, technically North Korea, the US, and South Korea are all technically still at war. But nowadays, there's very, very little bloodshed, which is obviously much desirable. And in regards to if North Korea is truly isolated, mostly. However, obviously, due to politics being what it is, it does have a few international connections with the rest of the world. Obviously, China and Russia, but also with Vietnam and various other African nations, and basically any country that's under communist or had communist or were under communist regimes at one point. So yeah.
At any moment, though, the Cold War could turn into a hot one, with both sides scrambling for any advantage they can get. South Korea can rely on the United States and other countries to aid them. But who can North Korea count on? The nation is one of the most diplomatically isolated on the planet and has been dubbed the Hermit Kingdom. So if the lead starts to fly, who's gonna help them? Some of the answers are unexpected, to say the least. Recently, a new international partner has thrown their lot in with North Korea, Russia. In June of 2024, North Korea...
To be honest, a Russian-North Korean pact or alliance is not really surprising to me, considering North Korea's history with the USSR, which not only consisted of Russia but also former Soviet states such as Belarus and whatnot. So yeah, it's not really surprising there.
And Russia signed a historic agreement called the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. This agreement comes as a bit of a shock, though, given that Russia had previously supported sanctions against North Korea to undermine its nuclear program. Still, the agreement explicitly states that either nation will come to the aid of the other in the event of an armed invasion by a hostile power. This is actually not the first alliance between North Korea and Russia, the first being a pact in 1961 with the then Soviet Union. And the current treaty shares a similar language. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the treaty was replaced by a much weaker arrangement with Russia in 2000. This treaty promises direct intervention, but North Korea has actually been indirectly involved in Russian military efforts for some time now. Pyongyang has already sent large stockpiles of artillery shells and rockets to bolster Russian supplies.
Not to mention North Korean troops are now on the front line, so yeah. Obviously it's a shock, but to me personally, I don't find it surprising, to be honest.
Recently, they've sent more advanced weapons, including self-propelled artillery, MLRS systems, and short-range ballistic missiles. While it's possible that each nation is genuine with their commitment to aid the other, there may be ulterior motives behind this decision. Russia will gain access to North Korean military supplies needed for the continuing campaign in Ukraine, and North Korea receives increased trade, including food, raw materials, and rubles, all of which are needed in the cash-poor nation. Western analysts can only speculate if Russia will actually come to the defenses of the Hermit Kingdom, or if the alliance is just the means to an end. Russia needs North Korea for the ammunition and weapons systems that have been expended in the conflict in Ukraine. But if these stockpiles run out, there may be no benefit in continuing the agreement. The treaty makes it clear that military intervention will only be sanctioned in a defensive war against an aggressor, and not if North Korea strikes first. There's also
Yeah, if North Korea were to start a war, I don't see Russia or China in directly helping North Korea. They might help them indirectly, but even so, it's best to speculate that if even if they do indirectly involve themselves, the involvement will be very minuscule, at least to the point, at least to a certain point, you know.
Enough legalistic wiggle room for either nation to avoid getting involved under certain circumstances, mostly provisions about military action consistent with the laws of each respective country, which is a convenient and vague enough loophole to avoid being drawn into a foreign war with what appears to be an ally of convenience. If war in Korea does break out, it's difficult to say if Russia will become involved directly. Most of Russia's military is fighting thousands of miles away in Ukraine, and Moscow wouldn't want to fight a two-front war if possible, and may look for a way to avoid the conflict. North Korea may be better off looking to a more established ally, China. Since its founding, North Korea has relied heavily on China for military aid. During the Korean
Yep, and to this day, China is North Korea's largest trading partner, which is obviously not surprising given how they're both communists and they both share a border with each other. But you know, still fun fact to know.
Korean War, Chinese troops joined the fighting, throwing back the UN advance up the peninsula. Ever since the armistice was signed, China has remained North Korea's closest ally and trade partner. This was formalized in a treaty signed in 1961. China has close association with North Korea due to their shared communist governments, as well as sharing a land border. So there are ideological and pragmatic reasons for their alliance. This has been strained over the years.
Not to mention, there's also another political reason why China would help North Korea, even though they've also placed sanctions on them. It's because obviously, China is already surrounded by so many U.S. allies and U.S. bases. If North Korea were to collapse and it landed in the hands of South Korea and the U.S. and the U.S. China would have a U.S. Military base directly in front of a landlocked border, a land-based border. Sure, there's Taiwan, but that's different. So Taiwan's an island, but a land-based border is even more. But a U.S. military base in front of a land-based border is even more threatening to China. So although China has put sanctions on North Korea, North Korea collapsing is not what China wants, and thus even so they still help North Korea, at least to the point where they won't collapse.
However, one of North Korea's main economic policies has been juche, or self-reliance, which is, by definition, an internationally alienating policy. To complicate matters even more, China has tried to increase its international trade with both South Korea and the United States, two nations that have the most antagonistic relationship with North Korea. China still had a policy of mutual defense and cooperation with North Korea, but this was strained by the aggressive saber-rattling and provocations of Pyongyang. Things came to a head in 2006 after a North Korean nuclear weapon test, which caused the much more internationally minded China to back UN sanctions. And as recently as 2017, China has placed unilateral sanctions on North Korea as a punitive measure for its missile and nuclear program. Both nations were reconciled in 2021 when they renewed their defensive pact, but China is still wary of being dragged into a conflict. China is heavily focused on trade and expanding their economy, and getting embroiled in a war on behalf of a foreign nation is high on the list of things to be avoided. Any renewed fighting in Korea will certainly involve the United States, which is China's largest trading partner. China has stated that they will only protect North.
And while we're on the topic of trade, you know, many people think it's only China, Russia, and all these communist countries that are engaging with trade in North Korea. But no, actually, even a few democratic countries that are friendly to the U.S. Still engage in trade. Actually, do engage in some trade with North Korea. Poland, Poland has often hired North Korean overseas construction workers with in infrastructure and construction projects. Not to mention, there's a fountain statue in Germany, I think. Either Germany or Italy, I can't remember. However, there's a fountain statue in Germany that was made by North Koreans in North Korea. Not to men- and not to mention, there was once a time when Armani got its fabric supply from the North Korean textile industry and companies. So, yeah, as much as we think on all these, USA friendly nations don't engage in trade with North Korea. If you truly look deep deep behind the curtains and under the table, you'll find some, discrete forms of trade and whatnot.
North Korea, if it's attacked first, and would sit out any fight that started with North Korean aggression. China wants to avoid the complications that a renewed Korean war will bring, such as economic difficulties, sanctions, and an inevitable refugee crisis. Keeping Pyongyang from doing something rash is a top priority, and Beijing is willing to use the fact that China provides between 90 and 98% of North Korea's foreign trade as leverage to keep peace and stability in the region. Russia and China are no doubt North Korea's greatest allies, but there are some other nations that may be able to lend some assistance if North Korea is invaded. Surprisingly, North Korea has actually intervened on behalf of other nations in the past.
Oh, good.
The question is, will these actions be reciprocated? The next most likely ally of North Korea would be Iran. Both of these nations are at odds with the United States and other Western powers, giving them a common foe. They also have exchanged scientists and engineers to work on their respective missile and nuclear capabilities. That's the extent of their relationship. There's no formal treaty binding the two countries, and Iran has other geopolitical aims rather than getting involved in a war 4,000 miles away. So other than some mutual enemies, there's little reason or opportunity to intervene. During the Vietnam War, North Korea sent around 1,000 soldiers and several pilots to aid their fellow communists against the South Vietnamese and American adversaries. It's also believed that some NVA were trained in North Korea. Nowadays, though, the relationship between the two nations is strained, especially...
Yeah, although Vietnam is communist, they are taking on a more capitalistic approach when it comes to trade and economics. And thus getting involved with North Korea militarily in the view from an economic standpoint wouldn't give them any much benefit. So it's highly unlikely they would intervene if North Korea were to enter a conflict. Also, fun fact, North Korea does operate and own some restaurants within Vietnam and also Vietnam and Cambodia. And in Cambodia, there's actually a museum that was constructed and owned by North Korea, and obviously there's a profit agreement that North Korea gets a large percentage of profits for the first 10 years. Then after that, they split the profits and whatnot from the museum.
After Vietnam instituted economic reforms and began diplomatic relations with South Korea, it's unlikely they would get involved if North Korea was invaded. Syria has worked with North Korea, who allegedly helped with missile and chemical weapons development. There's also reports that North Korean soldiers participated in the recent Syrian civil war on behalf of Bashar al-Assad, though this was denied and difficult to confirm. With the country whacked by the aftermath of a civil war and Assad's overthrow, It's also highly unlikely that they would aid North Korea. North Korea has developed good relationships with Egypt and Libya, sending military advisors and Air Force personnel to Egypt during the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and had a defense pact with Hosni Mubarak, and also had a similar arrangement with Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. North Korea has sold weapons to both nations. Both countries have experienced recent internal strife and are unlikely to be able to send any meaningful aid to help their North Korean allies. Even though it's one of the most politically isolated nations on the planet, North Korea has tried to expand its influence into Africa. They've traded weapons and sent military and police advisors to Madagascar, Benin, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. While no doubt grateful for the assistance,
Yep, and North Korea is actually the one who constructed the largest statue in Africa. I don't remember if the statue's in Zimbabwe or Mozambique, but I know it's around in South Africa. Not the country itself, but I mean geographically speaking, within this part of Africa. So yeah.
these nations would be unlikely to become involved in a conflict on the other side of the planet.
Not to mention, many of these countries, although not as poor as North Korea, are still quite poor. So economically speaking, it would be unlikely that they would want to help North Korea if it was in a conflict.
Many also fall under the sphere of influence of China and will take their cues from Beijing rather than Pyongyang. Other nations have or had friendly diplomatic relationships with North Korea, including Cuba, Bulgaria, and Pakistan. That said, the political, economic, and military realities each nation faces makes any intervention in Korea highly unlikely. Oh, and North Korea had a very close relationship with Yugoslavia. For obvious reasons, this isn't a factor anymore. In the event of an invasion of North Korea, the only real allies that can provide meaningful help would be Russia and China, two nations that have a vested interest in keeping the peace and not having a repeat of 1950.
Okay, so that was that was really good. This was quite informational. There was some information that I did not know, such as I knew it had relations with Latin American and Central American countries, but I didn't really remember which countries they were and whatnot. Yeah, but so yeah, if you like this video, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, check out the video on Simple History's channel. They're honestly super amazing. It's one of my favorite history channels right now, along with Oversimplified and whatnot. So yeah, and comment down below what if you think that if North Korea were to get in a conflict, do you think Russia and China would send direct help or just help indirectly? Personally, I think if North Korea were to be attacked, then maybe they'd provide some direct help. But if North Korea were to attack first, then I highly doubt they will send any direct help. And if they do give indirect help, it'll probably be minuscule. But comment down below, what do you think? So yeah, that's all I got to say for now. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.